ubiquitous.
We've had a series of questions again about our homestead and how we got here and a bunch of other things like that. So we thought we'd take a few minutes and answer a few more of them. The first one was,
why do we have raised beds?
Why do we have raised beds indeed, Irene?
Well, when I first was living here, we were in the trailer at that time, and I wanted to do a small garden, and I realized very quickly there was no organic material in the soil. Our soil here is a combination of rock dust and clay and not a lot else, so it became immediately obvious that I had to go get a bunch of mulch from some box store and start adding it in. So when we became more certain about where we wanted our beds, we actually purchased topsoil from a company. Some of that was good and some of that was a disaster. That's another story. But we also discovered we had critters around here, so putting in raised beds allowed us to put a piece of hardware cloth down at the bottom and then build the walls, and that kept gophers from tunneling up and other critters from tunneling up into the beds and eating your veggies.
Yeah, we were having a real problem with gophers coming up and eviscerating all the roots that were below ground.
Yeah, you'd come out there in the morning and the plant would be all wilted and you're like, what happened? And you go over and you could just pick it up. There was nothing left below the ground. It had just been totally chewed off. It was like a cartoon.
Yeah. You know, when we first started growing our gardens here, we tried doing gardening the usual way for us, which had worked all over the United States. That meant that we dug a small plot, a lot of rocks in it that we pulled out, and then we planted. And some of the garden did okay, most of it didn't do very well at all. Then we tried doing the raised beds that Irene's talking about. And then finally we decided, when we had to rebuild those beds to put the hardware cloth in the bottom, that we'd go ahead and rebuild them as wicking beds. Now that's a topic for another discussion, but we now have raised beds that can be used for wicking beds and so on.
Right. Next question was, why do we do drip irrigation?
Yeah, when we first started gardening here, northern Arizona is a very arid environment. There's not a whole lot of water, and as Irene mentioned, there's not a lot of organic matter in our ground, which means there's not a lot of water holding capacity. So we looked at it and said, we're familiar with drip tape, drip lines, drip irrigation, all manner of things like that. We said, well, that makes sense to try doing. So,
right.
So then Irene built our first.
Right. I had seen it used extensively in California in both regular agriculture and also in orchards. Because obviously when you're growing grapes, it's a very expensive crop and you want to make sure these are wine grapes. Even the regular eating grapes, they would run irrigation tapes. So I investigated a couple of different types, discovered that I could go to the regular box stores in the area and pick up at least the basic stuff for the small irrigation, the quarter-inch lines and things like that. And also, as we became busier and busier, this was a godsend because I could get a little inexpensive timer. I think they were $32 when I first started. I think they may even be the same now. They really haven't gone up in price. They've kind of gone down. It would run several lines in the garden, and that made a huge difference. I didn't have to be standing there all the time. If I was gone for the day, I didn't have to worry about things drying up and dying. And now that we were more established, I mean, we have a solid PVC underground irrigation system that runs to individual beds, and then the individual beds, you can adjust them to do multiple things, including use drip irrigation line. The other thing that I do with my drip irrigation is we have bird baths in the center of the garden, and I have that drip irrigation run twice a day, once in the morning and once later in the afternoon, and that ensures that, hi.
Hello, Lisa.
That ensures that the birds have water all day. in the bird bath, because that's a big deal where we are. A lot of times there is no water available for the birds. So if you're willing to put out some water, you will acquire a lot of birds, which are wonderful for eating lots of bugs and seeds and things. Also, the bees and butterflies are attracted to them too. So we have to actually put in shallow pans so that the bees can get in, get their water, and get out. Sometimes you need to put some stones in or something so they have access to the water without drowning. And I have rescued many a bee from the bird bath that got in too deep. But the irrigation serves both the purpose of watering the plants, watering them when we're not there, and also keeping the birds and bees watered.
Yeah, so we started with that first small irrigation system that was run on a battery timer that turned the valve off and on. And that worked great. It meant that we didn't have to be here every day, all day, in order to watch our plants, because the water would just percolate down through the ground and it would be gone. And if it was a really hot day, we had plants that would really die if you were gone for 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So eventually we put in a full-on irrigation system using a large-scale controller. And that now controls all of our beds here on the homestead.
Right, we actually have two controllers, both of which are capable of handling 12 stations. Right. And the one in the yard, one of them is almost full, it's got 11 stations. The other one is being used currently to control one bed in the yard and the orchard. And eventually we're going to be adding more to that. So we do have expansion space there.
Now the most interesting question that I think we were asked in the past couple of weeks was, what's the most interesting or unique job that we've had?
Right, I think one of my more interesting jobs, kind of on the weird side, was I used to clean a machine shop. Now, this was a Department of Defense facility, and I used to go in after hours and clean this machine shop. And this place was huge. A lot of times I was actually cleaning this after I got done on my other job. I was working as a barmaid at a local bar in the evenings. And I would get off from work there, walk home. So I got off at there at 10, walk home. So I was home by 10:30, then go over to the defense plant and clean the machine shop, which I got paid 2 hours for cleaning the machine shop, no matter how long it took me. And the first time I did it, I think it took me probably 2 hours, because it was huge, and I don't care how methodical or well-equipped you were, but I had that thing down to an hour by the time I'd been working at it for a couple of months, and I was like this tornado coming through. I had to clean all the lathes and other equipment, the drill presses and everything, and sweep that, then get that onto the floor, then clean the floors, and start in small rooms and work your way out. And then sometimes I had to clean the welding room, and that was the size of a football field inside of a gigantic pole barn. And I was always delighted when I didn't have to clean that, because that just plain took time to sweep, no matter what. But they loved me. I think I was one of their best janitors ever. It was a little creepy, though. I tell you what, at 11:30 at night, when you're female by yourself in this gigantic cavern, I think if anyone had ever approached me, probably would have beat them to death before I even figured out who they were. But yeah, that was probably my weirdest. What would you say was your weirdest?
Well, first, let's introduce Isa to everybody. This is Isa, our semi-feral rescue cat that I actually acquired when I was working in California. Isa went to a friend's house in the middle of the cold and meowed at the door and said, "Feed me." So he did, and then I got the cat from a vet. So the most interesting, well, maybe it is not exactly interesting job that I had, was shoveling stuff at a tree farm. I probably know more about chicken shit than most everybody watching this video. I can tell you from moving 23 truckloads, that's about 130 cubic yards of chicken manure, green chicken manure, moved it by hand from one place to another in this in the tree farm, not a chicken farm, tree farm. It took all summer to move it because the manure had to be spread around trees and shrubs and so on. None of this was for human consumption. It was all ornamental, well, mostly ornamental. And I can tell you the color change that happens in green chicken manure over time. It was so bad along in July that the piles started to swell up, and when you stuck a shovel into the pile, it deflated. And when it deflated, ammonia came out. Really nasty, bad ammonia. So the good thing about having that particular job, besides learning some more things about dealing with trees and shrubs and other products, was it convinced me that I really did want to finish college. I really didn't want to be doing that kind of a job for the rest of my life. And so that was a good thing.
I've often said that every teenager should have to shovel manure all summer in the heat of the summer to see if they really want to do that for the rest of their lives. Because it's one thing to do it if it's your own farm or your own homestead, because you want to do it in the sense that you're doing it for the benefit of your homestead. It's another thing entirely to have to do that because that's the only job you're qualified to do.
So I hope these answers provide a little more insight to Irene and myself. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification to find out about the new things that we post. Thanks for watching.
See you next time.
She is a helper. She was busy biting my hand.
Yes, she does that.